Howard Fredrics, and I'm honored to be at the Jed C. Barker American Legion Post in Park Ridge with Sergeant Kozuo Fred Yamaguchi. Sergeant Yamaguchi served our country with great distinction as a member of the U.S. Army, where he was stationed in Japan during World War II following the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Fred and I first met at a Veterans Day event this past November and had a very nice chat about his upbringing in Ozone Park, Queens, New York, and a little bit about his experience serving in Japan. Fred, it's a delight to have you here with us today to share your story with PKRG-TV viewers. A real pleasure to have you here, Fred.
Thank you.
So Fred, can you tell us a little bit about where you were born and what it was like for you growing up as a Japanese-American boy in the years leading up to the war?
I was born in Long Island City. No, the proper pronunciation is Long Island City.
Yes, Long Island.
Right, Long Island City. And, let's see, Long Island City. And then my family moved to Woodside. And then from Woodside, we moved to Ozone Park, Queens.
Mm-hmm. And what was the ethnic makeup like in your neighborhood in Ozone Park?
Basically, it was still segregated by race. Parts where I grew up were mainly Italian Americans. And my best friend is one of those who grew up in Ozone Park. And it was a very interesting part of my life growing up in Ozone Park, Queens. And my grandfather owned a 40-acre piece of property there in Cedar Lane, Ozone Park. And most of our neighbors were of German extraction and German American.
So there was a mix of German Americans and Italian Americans in your neighborhood mostly.
Yes.
Right.
But where I grew up in Cedar Lane, my neighbors were all German Americans.
I see.
And I was very fortunate, my whole family was very fortunate to have this lady called Harriet Reimels, who took us under her wing. Because World War II was going on, and because of our German-American neighbors, we experienced very little discrimination.
I see. Okay, and where were your parents born?
All my parents and my grandparents, they were all born in Japan.
And when you were growing up at home, did your parents and you speak Japanese together?
At home, I spoke nothing but Japanese at home because my parents would not allow me not to speak only Japanese at home.
I see. So how did you first learn English then?
Well, I learned English when I started going to public school, 63, and then from there, from public school to high school, John Adams High School, and all of my friends growing up were all American born like myself, and we spoke to each other only in English, of course, because they didn't understand Japanese.
Of course. Well, were there any other Japanese American children living in the neighborhood where you grew up, or were you the only ones?
My family was the only one.
How was that?
How was it?
Yeah, did you feel in any way different or isolated because you were the only Japanese American in your neighborhood?
I was very fortunate in that I grew up with Italian Americans as friends and with German Americans as friends. Now, when World War II started, we were at war with Germany and Italy, and my family, Japanese.
And did you think that they treated you any differently, the people in your neighborhood, because you were Japanese American? Any of the people that you grew up with, or even their parents, treated you any differently because you were Japanese American?
They may have inwardly might have had some feelings of discrimination, but their kids, they were just like me. They were all born in Queens, and we all grew up together, going to the same elementary school, going to the same high school.
So they treated you the same, just like any other kid, even though you were Japanese American, even though they may have felt differently, but they actually, the way they behaved towards you was you were just like any other kid in the neighborhood.
To some extent. However, in some way, my grandfather had built up a very, very lucrative greenhouse business.
Ah.
And he was, I guess, in those days, his business was so successful, he would be considered a millionaire.
I see. So how did that affect the way that people treated you, or did it?
Well, they respected money.
Ah, yes, money talks. I understand completely. So shifting over now to your experience going into the U.S. Army, when and how did you actually end up serving in the U.S. Army? Were you drafted or did you volunteer for enlistment?
At first, I tried to enlist. Then I found out what it was all about. And they reclassified me from 1A to 4C. So when I ran up to my draft board and I said, "What the hell is 4C?" He says, "Well, you're an enemy alien unsuitable for military service."
I see.
And I told the head of the draft board to go F himself.
Ah, so, and what actually initially motivated you to enlist? Oh, I see. So this is your actual card, your identification card from the War Department. Thank you. So, what actually motivated you to want to enlist in the first instance?
Well, the propaganda that was on television and, all over, I said, well, I want to join. But much to my disappointment, I tried to join the Navy. No. Good friend of mine, we both went, I forget where we went, somewhere in Manhattan to try to join the Navy. Well, his name was Richard Bauer, German-American family.
See?
They took him right away. And then he went to ROTC.
In spite of the fact that he was German-American and we were at war with Germany.
Right.
So there was a difference.
And me, I didn't stand a chance.
I see. So after you were barred from actually enlisting, so you tried to go into the Army and they said, no, you're 4C. And then you tried to go into the Navy and they said no to you as well. How did you finally manage to convince the Army to reconsider and regard you as a potential asset to the war effort?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president at the time.
Yes.
And he gave Executive Order 9066 to incarcerate all Japanese and Japanese Americans on the West Coast.
Yes.
And from Hawaii. And he had a little trouble getting all ethnic Japanese in New York incarcerated, because Mayor LaGuardia and others had different ideas about that.
Right.
But again, when Eleanor Roosevelt, president's wife,
Yes.
told her husband, why incarcerate only ethnic Japanese Americans in our concentration camps? Why not Germans and Italians? And I guess Franklin told her, Eleanor, I can't do that. But Eleanor went to bat for us.
I see.
And counseled her husband to open the draft for all Japanese Americans.
Wow.
Now, Chinese Americans were not touched. They were allies.
Yes.
So Chinese Americans were drafted in a normal way. But Japanese American 4C and then Eleanor must have jumped all over him.
So in other words, after Eleanor got done with Franklin, he changed his mind, and then you were able to volunteer to enlist, or were you actually drafted at that point?
No, then the draft board changed their mind, and they did away with 4C, and I was 1A again, and I got drafted, and I was sent to Camp Landing in Florida for my basic training, where we were all a segregated unit, and
Segregated by race?
race.
So the Japanese Americans were separated from the Anglo-Americans and other Americans. So did any of your family members in the United States endure internment in camps during the war?
Yes. The only one they interned was my grandfather, because he became very successful in having developed a ornamental greenhouse business.
Right.
And he became very, very rich. So they respected money.
And so they interned him as a result with his money?
They tried to intern
him
in Ellis Island. And
see.
when my father's friend, who was constantly married to Vito Genovese, my grandfather was out the next day.
So somebody persuaded some people to release your grandfather from this internment.
Yes.
And he was then freed.
Right.
And yet he was in New York, so he was one of the people in New York, because he was such a prominent person, that they decided to intern in one of these camps, or try to intern at least, even though he was in New York and Mayor LaGuardia wasn't on board for that. So because he was such a big deal, they wanted to maybe, single him out and put him in that camp. Is that right?
There's an interesting story about Mayor LaGuardia.
Yes.
Of course, he was the Italian-American mayor of New York City. And...
Wasn't he half Jewish, too?
Yes.
Yes.
And
interesting.
My sister got her bachelor's degree from one of the universities, and she applied as a dietitian in one of the hospitals in New York City, and she was told no. And when my family told Mayor LaGuardia went to bat for my sister.
That's wonderful.
And she got a job
Good.
as a dietitian.
Good, good, very good. So how did you actually feel once you were in the Army about serving the U.S. Army while other Japanese Americans were actually being forced to live in internment camps? How did that make you feel?
It made me really angry. I was really pissed off.
I don't blame you one bit. So where exactly were you stationed, and what were you assigned to do during your service in Japan and the Philippines?
Well, initially I was given basic training. I took my basic training in Florida. Now, again, as all segregated unit. And when we finished basic training, most of us were sent to Europe. Some of us who were bilingual were sent to the Pacific, and I told my captain, I don't want to go to the Pacific. I want to go to Europe. And the captain, he actually laughed at us. He said, hey, son, you're in the Army. You go where you're sent.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ended up going to the Philippines.
I see. And that was your first stop. It was the Philippines.
Yes, in the Philippines.
Where in the Philippines were you actually?
I was in Cavite, in Santa Ana, on the Pasig River, and we were part of ADIS, Allied Interpreter and Translation and Interrogation Section. And ADIS was composed of all allies, French, Italians, Germans, New Zealanders, Australians, and of course Americans. And our unit were all Japanese Americans. We were the largest part of that group because all the English, the French, all the Anglos, they knew their basic Japanese, but not having had parents and really understanding the Japanese people, they were second rate to us.
Of course. Of course. So
And-
then you were there to translate and really be a cultural attaché, if you will.
Very fancy words.
Yes.
They didn't treat us like we were attachés,
Yeah,
but
Sure.
they needed us badly.
Of course.
So they had to respect us.
Right. So you were doing translations
Interrogation mostly.
and interrogation. So you were translating as part of the interrogation process.
Yes.
So you would sit there and another officer, for example, would ask some questions and you would translate it into Japanese for the prisoner.
Officer,
Right.
being ethnically Japanese, I was a big deal sergeant.
That's not too shabby either. My father was a staff sergeant in Army intelligence during the war, and it was a very important and valuable role to serve, no question about it.
Well, they needed us really badly because the Anglos, all they knew was the basics, reading and writing. But they didn't understand their culture and all the
Yes,
rest of it.
The cultural issues are such an important
Right.
part of how to deal with people.
And I ended up having to interrogate the survivors of the battleship Yamato.
Wow, so that was a ship that was a Japanese ship that was sunk?
Yes, our Air Force sunk them. And the Yamato was the biggest BB, BB stands for battleship. It was the biggest battleship ever built, 18-inch guns,
Wow.
shooting shells the size of an automobile.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And anyway, my job was supposed to be to interrogating these POWs, were kids like me.
Yeah.
I was barely 18 at that time.
Wow.
And these kids were survivors,
Wow.
and they were the same age as me. So my attitude was interrogate them? Hell, all you Anglos, you can interrogate them. All I did was to bullshit with them. Where were you born? Where do you come from? And they were, the POWs, the Japanese POWs were really surprised and interesting to talk to this kid from Ozone Park, Queens.
So how did they relate to you since you were a Japanese American, you could speak their language, you understood their culture, but yet you were the enemy because you were on the side of the U.S. Army?
And we understood that, both of us.
How did they relate to you in light of that?
They didn't regard me as their enemy.
I see. Because you were one of them, ethnically, you were Japanese American, you could speak Japanese, and you understood them. Is that right?
Yes.
I see. Very interesting.
And it's the way that we reacted to them.
How was that different?
Well, I was watching some of the Anglos doing their interrogation. And, the typical winners who won the war, blah, blah, and they had an attitude.
What was that attitude like?
They were ordering them
I see.
and then treating them pretty shabbily. And our attitude was, hey, you guys, you Anglos need us more than we need you. You can go to hell.
Right. And how did you treat the Japanese prisoners that was different from the way the superior officers who were Anglos and other ethnicities, how was the way that you treated the prisoners different?
We treated them not as enemies. And I wasn't interested in getting, interrogating and getting all kinds of information from them about the war. I could care less. And we treated them as fellow humans.
That's really what matters, is that we all are, in fact, human beings, and we should never forget the fact that we're humans,
And
no
one
matter
of the
what.
most touching part of that was we used to rotate our meals. One day would be the Anglos, the Australians, and whatnot. And the Australians, they grew a lot of sheep. and they had lamb, and I can't, to this day, I can't
Can't
stand
stand
that
lamb,
stink.
huh? Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
I went to their POW camp and talked to them, and I said, hey, could you do me a big favor of inviting me to have lunch and supper with you? And they said, of course.
You mean the Japanese
Yeah.
prisoners, you wanted to go to their camp so that you could maybe eat some Japanese food?
I did.
Ah, good,
When
good.
and it was when it was the Australians' time to cook for the Allies, I said, nope.
Different tastes, yep. So how did the other American soldiers and various superior officers treat you as a Japanese American serving in the U.S. Army?
We were, as a whole, even more highly educated. Some of us had masters, some of us had PhDs, and they understood and they respected us.
I see.
And
good.
our attitude towards our officers was, you will treat us with respect, or higher ups will hear about it.
Good. Well, you had a bargaining chip in a way because you were so important. You were needed for a service that only you and your colleagues who were Japanese Americans could perform. And the other soldiers from other ethnicities who didn't speak Japanese, who didn't know the culture, couldn't do that. So they absolutely needed you.
And the Army did a good job of informing the officers about our background and how important we were. So the officers treated us with respect.
Good. So what did you feel your personal goal was, given the nature of your assignment, and how did you achieve that goal as part of your official duties? So what was your personal goal, and how did you make that fit into your official duties?
Well, number one, I was very frustrated that, big deal, I'm a staff sergeant. And that really pissed me off, because I knew I was better at the job I was doing than they would by far. So that was always in my head.
Of course.
And I treated the Japanese with more respect than I treated my white officers.
Mm-hmm. So what was your personal goal while you were serving in the Army in that role? Did you have a personal goal, and how did you reconcile that with the specific tasks that you were assigned to do? In other words, were you there just to do what you were told to do, or did you have another sort of underlying agenda, another goal that you were trying to achieve as part of your service, while at the same time still managing to fulfill the role that you were asked to serve in?
Well, I think I did a damn good job of fulfilling my job.
Yes.
And my goal was to eventually, hopefully, become an officer. And the frustrating part of it was when I was going to University of Connecticut, who finally accepted me as a student there, and I enrolled in the College of Agriculture at the University of Connecticut. And part of that was that I had to take ROTC.
I see.
Now, the head of the ROTC was a master sergeant. And when I showed up, he didn't know what to do with me.
So in that situation, was that after the war that you went to college then at the University of Connecticut? So
Yes.
this is after the war.
Yes.
I see. Okay.
And
So
when I tried to go to college, I started out, I applied for MIT, blah, 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 and all the rest of them. Penn State, Princeton, blah, blah, blah. No. Then I said, it's a racial issue. So finally, when I applied to UConn, the president of the University of Connecticut was he was Dutch Reformed, and he allowed students from the concentration camps to come he admitted them to University of Connecticut, free tuition, free room and board, free travel vouchers, blah, 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 blah. And I fell under that. Although I didn't deserve it, I was never put in a concentration camp.
But he put you in a position where he gave you an admission to the course and
Right.
to and all of the free benefits that other people who were in concentration camps received. Oh, well, you
So
were very fortunate.
I got my college education for free.
Excellent. So going back to when you were stationed overseas and you were in the Philippines and you were in Japan, where in Japan were you actually?
I was in Tokyo because I was directly assigned to MacArthur's headquarters, GHQ. And, well, whenever they needed somebody, you know, who was bilingual, hey, Yamaguchi, go here. So one day I get a call from headquarters, go to the residence, to the, what do they call where they, like where MacArthur and his family lived. All the ambassadors' houses were on the French embassy. Embassy Row.
Embassy Row.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So I go there. Hey, Yamaguchi, you got to go to the American embassy. Mrs. MacArthur is having problems. So anyway, why me?
Yeah,
I guess
good question.
I guess my boss felt I was comfortable.
I see.
You know, I didn't have an attitude.
And what did you do when you went
Well,
and met with Mrs. MacArthur?
Mrs. MacArthur says, "Oh, Sergeant, thank you very much for coming here." I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I said, "Oh, this is the general's wife." So she greeted me, opened the door, and while she's talking to me, the general comes down the stairs, you know, with his crushed hat, his Ray-Bans, and his corn cob. And he goes, "Hi, dear." And that was his third wife. She says to him, "Yes, General." And I'm going, myself, as I looked at him, he didn't even see me. So anyway, he goes out into his black Cadillac, limo black, with the two, you know, the three stars. And I said, "That's the big boy?" And I said to myself, Anyway, so then I said, "Mrs. MacArthur, what can I do for you?" Then she tells me, "I'm having trouble with my water." I said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" She says, "Well, I'm in the habit of getting up early in the morning and taking a shower and a bath, but they don't turn the water on this part of Embassy Row until 12 noon, and they only leave the water turned on for 15 minutes. And that doesn't give me enough time to take a bath or a shower. So could you do something about it?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, of course I can." So I go down to the chief of the water department of Tokyo, and I told him, I said, "This Embassy Row is where Ambassador Douglas MacArthur, the general, lives with his wife, and my orders from headquarters are to tell you to make sure that at Embassy Row, where Mrs. MacArthur lives, the water be turned on 6 o'clock in the morning and left on for at least 20 minutes. So, of course, I am representing the victors, us, and I'm ordering the head of the Tokyo Water Department, "You will make sure." And then he says, "Sir," to me, "can I tell you something?" I said, "Of course." So he said, You see what Tokyo looks like." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Don't you see the billions of leaks all over Tokyo?" He says, "This is it right now." He said, "The leaks are so many and so bad that we can't have enough water to have build up in our reservoir to have a hydrostatic head." I said, "What do you mean by hydrostatic head?" He said, well, the level of the water in the reservoir is what controls the pressure to distribute the water all over Tokyo. I said, oh, I understand. I said, so what's the problem? He said, well, if I must do what you, headquarters, GHQ, is ordering us to do, he said, there would be thousands of Japanese with no water. And
For most of the day, then.
all day. He said, then you can see what the situation is. He says, most of us, we're in rags. We need water just to survive.
Of course. Everybody needs water to survive.
So I said, yes, sir, I will report to my headquarters and tell them what you have told me. And then he says, oh, Sergeant, another thing. If the Japanese people are deprived of their water, there might be a rebellion. And I said, sir, I understand what you're saying. I understand your Japanese and your culture and all the rest of it, and your responsibility to take care of the millions of Japanese that live here. And I said, I will report that to headquarters. And then when I report that to headquarters said, okay, Yamaguchi, we're going to build a water tower on the embassy grounds.
Yeah, solve the problem themselves
Right.
and
So
not have to take from the Japanese people.
Right, we're going to build a 20,000-gallon water tower. So I go back and I report to my boss. I said, hey, the boss wants us to build a 20,000-gallon water tower. What? 20,000? You know how huge that is?
It's pretty big.
So I said, Lieutenant, take me to your boss, our boss. So I go see the colonel. I said, sir, this is the situation. A 20,000 water tower is ridiculous. I think you'll agree. All right, we'll cut it down to 10,000. Yamaguchi, you will go and what do you call it when we, as the victor, we go in and just take it.
Pillage, if you will.
Not, well, actually pillage. So I went to some of the big steel companies and I told them, I want so many sheets of steel. Be sure to have, right? Be sure to deliver it to the American Embassy building. Blah, blah, blah. So here's Yamaguchi running around getting steel sheets to build this 10,000-gallon water tower.
Ah, so it went from 20,000 to 10,000
Yeah.
now. Okay, that's
Right.
a little bit better.
I talked the colonel down. Said, hey, she wouldn't need 20,000 gallons. I said, how about cutting it in half? That's more than enough. So, okay. Anyway, now
Reasonable
Yamaguchi,
compromise.
right? So now Yamaguchi's running around getting sheet steel. And then he's running around getting pumps to handle pumping the water. And now he's running around getting electric motors, blah, blah, blah. And I go, this is what I'm in the Army to do, is a gopher.
I can see that as a little bit demeaning in a way, but it was also important too, and you actually achieved something too.
I realized how important it was. I saw these millions, thousands of people literally dying from starvation. And little kids,
Yeah.
parentless kids. Hell, we killed most of their parents.
Yeah.
These 2, 3, 4, 5-year-old kids just wandering around. That was one of the saddest part of my serving in the occupation.
That's the nature of war and the aftermath of war. It's a very tragic and horrific thing. So this was all taking place, this part when you were in Tokyo, was after the Americans and the Allies declared victory
Yeah.
and you were still occupying Japan in the aftermath
Right.
of the main part of the conflict. What year was this now?
40, 44.
44.
But
Okay.
the part that really got to me was seeing these homeless kids, parentless kids, just wandering around. And I could see these kids, they were dropping dead from starvation. So finally, our group, the MIS, we were all a segregated unit, ethnic Japanese.
Yes.
We took over the former NYK, that's the big shipping company. There was a main building of the NYK lines, and we took it over. It was a big building, and that became our place to live, a place to eat, and our offices were there. So when we saw these little kids, homeless, parentless, wandering the streets, we brought these kids in. And they were loaded with lice.
What were you able to do for them?
Well, we would bathe them, clean them, and these kids were in PTSD. They didn't speak at all. They just stared away. And then after we washed them, we cut our uniforms down, we clothed them, and we would feed them. Then, from upstairs, you'll not give aid and comfort to the enemy. And all of us, Japanese Americans, to a man, told the colonel, go F yourself.
Good for you. That's the right thing.
And the colonel tried to make a big deal out of it until we got a hold of MacArthur and told him what was going on. The colonel shut his mouth.
It's often the case that the sort of middle-level officers are the ones that are the most difficult because they have just enough power to do things, but they also don't have the humanity that it takes to be a real leader in some cases.
In some cases.
Of course, there's always
Right.
plenty of
There
good
are-
ones,
there are.
but that's where sometimes you'll find that kind of attitude. And then when you go to the very highest levels, they are the kinds of people with the character that it takes to do the right thing, usually, more often.
Well,
Do you agree?
yes, but we went directly to General MacArthur.
Yep.
Things changed overnight like that.
It's just like Mrs. Roosevelt. It took somebody at that level to affect the kind of change that was needed. So during the time when you were in Japan and when you were in the Philippines, well, I guess obviously when you were in Japan, the fighting had already stopped. But when you were in the Philippines, was that during the time when there was active combat going on? And did you witness any actual combat taking place or participate in it in any way?
Thank goodness for my work. I was no longer an infantry soldier. I was in military intelligence.
Right.
So my job wasn't to, even if I was ordered to, I told the lieutenant, go F yourself. You do it.
You didn't want to be the one to do it.
Right.
But did you actually see any actual combat happening, or was it happening around you at all? Or
It was happening all around me.
Right. So you were in a position, you were in a place where it was actually a kind of a dangerous place to be, but
And
you weren't actually involved in the actual combat.
Thank God, because I'm wearing, of course, this American uniform, but this face confused a lot of the Filipinos. Who the hell is me
Yeah,
with this
I
face?
can imagine.
But in American uniform, so they kind of steered clear of me, and I made sure they did, because I had my 45. One day, I'm in Manila. I had to do something, and I find some of these younger a Filipino kid, younger, my age. These kids are calling me traitor and this and that in Tagalog. Of course, I didn't understand Tagalog, but then they kept after me. So finally, I stopped and I pulled my .45. I said, "Get the hell out of here!" And I pointed. If I had to, I would have shot him.
But that did the trick, though.
I did the trick.
Yeah.
They backed off.
So, how did your experience serving in the Pacific affect your life once you actually returned to America, both immediately upon your return and over the course of your whole life and career since returning?
Well, when I was there, I decided to make the Army part of my life. Knowing my ability and what I was able to do when I was in the occupation, well, number one, I get a call from what they call the GHQ Utilities Company that they were having trouble with the Japanese company that they had hired to make lumber. So I go there to GHQ Utilities, and there is Captain, well, I forgot his name, big shot. Yeah, I said, "Sir, I was told to report to you to help you with your problem." "Yeah, I got these Japanese company. They're the ones that are making lumber. They're getting timber, and they're making lumber to build this warehouse, to warehouse our GHQ utilities for our troops here in the occupation. We have to build this big laundry and dry cleaning building to do all this for our GIs." So I said, "So what do you want from me?" He says, he had an attitude. He's talking down to me. And I said, "Sir, I'm not in your command. I don't have to take your orders." He said, "Wait. He says, "You are now in my command." I thought to myself, "Oh, shh. Somebody is, the headquarters I was with, somebody's giving it to me." I guess they didn't like my attitude. Anyway,
Well, yeah.
he said, "Those goddamn Japs that are supposed to be cutting this timber, they're not meeting the requirements." So I went to this guy. He was a civil engineer who had a workforce of skilled carpenters that were there to make timber, to make this huge warehouse. And I said, "Sir," when I got him to sit down and talk with me, he's shaking like this. He said, "Am I going to be put before a firing squad?" And I looked at him and I said, "What?" I told him. His name was Ono. I said, "Mr. Ono, the war is over. We are not going to put you before a firing squad.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything wrong. And I will make sure that nothing like this will happen to you." And I went to the captain and I said, "What the hell are you telling this guy, that you're going to put him before the firing squad?" I said, "I'm going to report you to GHQ. So, ass backs down. And there was his, what do you call it? This kid, it was a Jewish American kid, Robert Moses was his name.
Robert, not the Robert Moses
No,
developer.
no,
Oh, okay.
no.
Different Robert Moses.
Different
Okay.
Robert Moses.
All right.
I said, "What is he trying to do? He's giving this guy a hard time." And I said, "He's not getting enough raw timber to make everything what the captain, your captain." I said, "Even if I am now transferred under his command, he's not my captain." He said, "He's giving this guy, this Japanese civil engineer who's trying to do this job, a hard time. He's calling him all kinds of names. Of course, he doesn't understand English, and your captain doesn't understand Japanese. That's why you're here. And I thought to myself, oh.
So how did you solve this?
So I said, Mr. Owner, I will try to make sure that you get all the timber you need. So I went up the ladder. I found out who and where the largest Japanese timber company was located. One day, guy comes in to my office. And he said, I understand you have access to a lot of things. And then he's talking about that. And then I realized, Japanese mafia. He's trying to bribe me.
Uh-oh.
And I said, the Army knows what I get paid. American money doesn't do anything for me. In fact, I could go to jail for accepting bribery in American money. Well, then how about Japanese yen? Same thing with Japanese yen. Then well, how about gold bars? I said, you trying to bribe me? How do I know? That's not lead inside. And he's looking at me like I'm crazy. I said, get the hell out of here, or I'll have you locked up.
So what was the final result of this? How did you get the extra wood?
Finally, I went up the ladder and I found out the company that has the largest raw timber in his area. And I went to him and I said, who are you selling your timber to? I said, I know you are black marketing this timber because what the U.S. Army is paying you doesn't come close to what the raw market will pay you. And I said, unless you meet all the orders coming from GHQ to go to this company where they are cutting your timber into lumber, I said, I will make sure that your property will be confiscated and you will go to jail. And he's looking at me, he says, she's this kid. I was barely 18. Sees this face, speaking to him in his language. And his attitude was, who the hell is this kid giving me orders? And I said, you make sure, of course, I will make sure that all of your timber is delivered to this place. Sure enough, it was.
Great.
And now Mr. Ono says, my God, you saved my life. Then he says to me, Mr. Yamaguchi, one more thing. Could you do me a favor? I said, of course. He said, look at my men. They're 200. They're all skilled carpenters. They're in rags. And I looked and I said, yes, I see that. I said, and he says to me, I know where the Japanese military has a warehouse that is full of clothing. You know, coats, jackets, pants, shoes, whatnot. He said, I know where it is, and if you can give the orders, we could get enough to clothe my men. I said, of course. So we jump in the 6x6 or the 4x6, and we pull up to this huge warehouse. Go in, I give orders. Enough to clothe 200 men.
Wow. That's remarkable. So,
And then, why didn't I take the bribe? I could be a billionaire today if I took that money.
or you could have been in jail.
I don't think so.
Okay. But you did the right thing, though. Why did you do the right thing?
I guess I was lucky enough to be brought up by parents who believed in the right thing.
Yeah. So what do you hope to do with the rest of your life, and what role do you think that you can continue to play with respect to younger generations of Americans?
I hope I still do 1 day a week volunteer work at the Northport Veterans Hospital, and I tell them, hey, you young kids coming through here, as far as I'm concerned, I am the face of diversity. And I tell these young vets coming through, and they listen.
So you can be a role model for them in the way that you look at the importance of treating people equally.
That's why this crap.
Yes. So do you have any other general advice that you could offer to our younger viewers about living a good life well into your 90s? How do you do it?
What do you mean, well into?
Well, you're 94.
Right.
Isn't that right? So you're well in there. What advice can you offer?
Well, what I feel is my responsibility is to my children, my son and my daughter, and my 2 grandchildren. And I make sure they understand and they know.
They understand and they know what?
What I've been taught and what they should do with their lives.
So how about to all of the viewers out there who are watching this program on PKRG-TV, the younger viewers, how would you advise them to be able to live a long life and a good long life the way you have?
Well, we are a nation of diversity now. And I try to set an example. I am an example of a World War II veteran. That's why I wear all this crap, to impress people. Big deal. But anyway.
Well, you've impressed me, and justly so, actually.
It's important that we understand that we are a nation of diversity, which makes our country so beautiful. We are already a wonderfully diverse country. And that's my message to you younger people. We are so lucky to be who we are.
And I'm very, very lucky, and we are very lucky at PKRG-TV and in the Park Ridge community to have you here today with us to share your story and your experiences. I am so greatly honored. It's really been a pleasure, Fred. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.